Thunderstorms, in all their raw, violent beauty, have always had an undeniable power over us. The rumble of thunder, the flash of lightning, the primal rush of fear that washes over us as the wind howls and the rain lashes at our windows. For most people, a thunderstorm is just another passing event, an inconvenience, a reason to stay inside, perhaps even an opportunity to curl up with a blanket and watch the storm from the safety of home. But for others, the storm is not just weather, it is a harbinger, a herald of something far darker, far more sinister. There are stories, whispered in the dark corners of ancient homes and forgotten villages, that the storm does more than just pass over. It lingers, it watches, it feeds, and sometimes it brings with it something that should never have been awakened. The air grows thick with tension, crackling with something far more ominous than just static electricity. The sky darkens, not just with clouds, but with the promise of things unseen. Those who are caught in these storms don't always make it out. They don't always leave with their minds intact. There are legends, ancient, almost forgotten tales, that tell of how the storm itself has a way of drawing in the lost, the broken, and the curious. Of how the thunder doesn't just echo through the heavens, but vibrates through the fabric of reality itself, bending time, space, and minds to its will. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 4 stories. 4 tales of thunderstorm horrors that will haunt you long after the storm has passed. These stories will make you think twice the next time the sky darkens and the wind picks up. After all, how can you ever truly be sure when the storm will end and when the real terror will begin? So sit back, turn off the lights, and if you hear a faint knocking at your door or the wind whispering your name, don't go looking for it, because in tonight's storm, the thunder isn't the only thing you should be afraid of. In a remote corner of the countryside, tucked away behind dense trees and winding dirt roads, stood an old farmhouse. The kind of place you'd pass by quickly, hardly glancing at it, except for the feeling that it was watching you. The house had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, its front door sagging on its hinges. From a distance, it seemed like nothing more than a crumbling relic of the past, a forgotten memory left to decay with time. But tonight, on a night when the air was thick with the scent of impending rain and the sky was bruised with the deep purples and grays of a coming storm, the farmhouse stood out. There was something different about it tonight, something alive about the way it seemed to loom over the empty fields, waiting. It wasn't the first time a storm had gathered around that house, but on this night, it would be the last. A young couple, stranded on their way home from a weekend getaway, had found themselves seeking refuge. The rain had started as a light drizzle, but had quickly escalated into a torrential downpour, and the storm had seemed to follow them as they drove, the flashes of lightning illuminating the path before them. With no other options and no sign of shelter for miles, they spotted the farmhouse. It seemed to beckon them, its silhouette stark against the darkened sky. They made the decision to take shelter there, unaware that they were stepping into something far worse than just a storm. Inside the house, the air was cold and still. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old floorboards beneath their feet. The couple, Sarah and Mark, looked at each other with uneasy smiles, both silently relieved to be out of the storm. But there was a sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of their minds, an inexplicable feeling that they weren't alone in this house. They shrugged it off as nerves, the kind of jitters you get when trapped inside a strange, dark place with a storm raging outside. But the longer they stayed, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The air, despite being cold, felt charged, like the storm outside wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was alive, breathing, waiting for something. Mark made his way over to the window, peering out into the storm, watching the rain lash against the glass in violent sheets. "It's coming down harder now," he said, voice a little too casual, though Sarah could sense the tension in his tone. "We'll have to stay here until it dies down." But Sarah wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were fixed on the corner of the room, a darkened shadow that seemed to flicker in the flashes of lightning. It wasn't there in between the strikes, but every time the lightning lit up the sky, it was as though a figure, a silhouette, was standing in the corner, watching them. She turned to Mark, her voice low but trembling. "Mark, do you see that?" He glanced at the corner, then back at her with a forced smile. "You're just tired. It's the storm playing tricks on your eyes." But Sarah wasn't convinced. The figure was no trick. In the moments between lightning, she could feel its presence, the oppressive weight of it, just out of view. She felt it in the way the room seemed to grow colder with each passing moment, in the way the walls seemed to close in on them, just a little bit more with every flash of lightning. And then, as if the storm itself was a conductor, the house seemed to come alive. The floorboards creaked louder, almost as though someone, or something, was walking just beyond their reach. The shadows in the corner grew longer, stretching like fingers reaching out for them. "Mark, we need to leave," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic now, her eyes wide with fear. Mark turned, finally seeing what she had been seeing all along, the dark figure that lingered in the corner. His blood ran cold as he moved toward the door, but as his hand reached for the knob, it slammed shut with an almost deafening bang. They both froze. Something was wrong. The storm outside intensified. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows as the figure in the corner grew more distinct. Its shape began to solidify, the darkness shifting as though it were made of shadows themselves. In the next flash of lightning, it was there, standing right in front of them. It wasn't a human figure. It was something far older, far darker. The air grew thick with its presence, and Sarah could hear whispers now, faint, unintelligible, but unmistakably there. The whispers grew louder with each strike of lightning until they were deafening, surrounding them. Mark's voice cracked as he shouted, "What the hell is happening?" But before he could finish his sentence, the figure moved, quickly, almost inhumanly fast. It reached out to them with cold, skeletal hands, and in that moment, the storm outside reached its peak. The thunder rumbled louder than ever before, shaking the very foundation of the house. The lightning was relentless, crackling in the sky like the hand of God himself. The entire room was alive, buzzing with energy. But it wasn't the kind of energy that comforted you. No, it was the kind of energy that terrified you, the kind that made your skin crawl. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone, disappearing into the shadows, leaving nothing but the echo of its whispers in the air. The storm, too, seemed to fall silent. The couple, shaken to their core, tried to run, but the door wouldn't open. They screamed for help, but no one could hear them. The house was alive with the storm, and they were trapped. As the storm raged on outside, so did the terror inside the house. The figures, the whispers, and the shadows that stretched unnaturally long would continue to haunt them until they could find a way to break free, if they could find a way to break free at all. And the thing was, no one who had ever stayed in that house during a thunderstorm had ever left alive. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Just a mother and her young son, nestled in their small suburban home, waiting out the thunderstorm that had rolled in unexpectedly. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and the wind howled against the windows, but inside, everything felt safe. The flickering of the TV, the soft clink of the dishes being put away after dinner, the comforting murmur of the storm outside, everything was as it should be. But there was something off. The storm seemed to have a mind of its own, growing stronger by the minute. The wind howled like an animal in pain, and the thunder rumbled in the distance, too low, too ominous, as if it were something far more malevolent than just the weather. Sarah had lived in this house for years, but tonight, the storm felt different. The rain was relentless, the flashes of lightning blinding, and with each flash, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the storm that felt strange. There was an unsettling silence between the cracks of thunder, a weight in the air, a tension that gnawed at the back of her mind. She glanced over at her son, Timmy, who was huddled on the couch, clutching his favorite stuffed bear to his chest. His wide, innocent eyes were glued to the window, watching the rain as it streamed down in torrents. His lips parted, as if he was about to speak, but then the silence grew. For a moment, there was nothing but the storm. But just as she was about to call out to him, he whispered something that made her blood run cold. "Mama, someone's outside." Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The storm was deafening. There was no way anyone could be out there, especially in the torrential downpour. She stepped toward the window, peering through the soaked glass, but all she saw was the darkness, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. "Timmy, it's just the storm playing tricks on you," she said, trying to reassure him, though her voice trembled slightly. She turned to face him, but when she looked back at her son, his eyes were wide with fear. "No, Mama," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "It's not the storm. There's someone standing outside. I saw him. I saw him in the lightning." Her heart skipped a beat, the way he said it. There was no doubt in her mind that he had seen something, and it wasn't a trick of the mind. This wasn't just a child's wild imagination running rampant in the midst of a storm. There was something there, something real. Sarah's mind raced. She tried to dismiss it, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. There was no one out there. It was impossible. Yet when the next flash of lightning illuminated the yard, she saw it. Or rather, she saw him. Standing just at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the rain-soaked shadows, was a figure. Tall, lanky, and unmoving. A shadow that didn't belong. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to pause. The wind quieted, and in the sudden stillness, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her chest. The figure stood perfectly still, its head turned toward the house, its body hidden in the deep shadows of the night. But Sarah knew it was watching them. She could feel its eyes burning into her, even from that distance. "Mama." "He's coming closer," Timmy whispered again, his voice full of dread. His little hands gripped the stuffed bear so tightly that his knuckles were white. Sarah stepped back from the window, trying to calm herself, trying to dismiss the fear that was building in her chest. But it was too late. She could hear it now. The sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving across the wet ground, growing louder with each passing moment. The figure was moving toward the house. "Timmy, stay here," Sarah ordered, in a voice that was far steadier than she felt. She hurried to the front door, locking it quickly, glancing out through the small crack in the blinds. The figure was closer now, standing just at the base of the front porch. The storm raged around them, thunder cracking like the sky itself was being torn apart, but the figure was unaffected. The rain didn't seem to touch it. The wind didn't move it. It stood, unnaturally still, like a creature made of the storm itself. And as the lightning flashed again, Sarah saw something she hadn't noticed before. The figure had no face, just an empty space where the head should have been, a void that sucked in the light around it, leaving nothing but darkness. In that moment, Sarah knew that whatever was standing outside her door wasn't human. It wasn't of this world. It was something ancient, something born from the very storm that raged outside, a force that fed on fear, drawing strength from the storm, from the terror it caused. "Mama, I'm scared," Timmy said, his voice breaking as he looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. The figure was no longer standing still. It was moving now, moving toward the door. The storm intensified, the rain battering against the windows like 1,000 fists. The thunder rattled the walls of the house, shaking the very foundation beneath their feet. Sarah backed away from the door, her heart racing. She locked all the windows, bolted the back door, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere now. The air was thick with the presence of something dark, something wrong. The wind howled louder than ever, and with each gust, the entity seemed to draw nearer. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, there was silence. The storm paused, the wind stilled, and the thunder ceased. The only sound was the distant patter of the rain against the windows. Sarah stood frozen in place, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. The figure was gone, but she knew it wasn't over. The storm was far from finished, and neither was whatever had been out there. That's when the whispers started. At first, it was faint, just a murmur that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. But then it grew louder, more distinct. The words were incomprehensible, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was the voice of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this storm, waiting for her. She heard the words, or maybe felt them, deep in her bones. "You can't escape me. I will return with the next storm." She wasn't sure how much time passed before the storm finally eased, the rain slowing to a gentle drizzle, the thunder fading into the distance. But the fear stayed with her. The figure wasn't gone. It was only waiting for the next storm to return. The next time the storm came, so would it. And the next time, it might not be outside. It was a late summer evening when the storm first began. Emily had been staying at her grandmother's old house, a place she had visited every year since she was a little girl. Nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy town, the house had always felt like a safe haven. Peaceful, quiet, and steeped in the kind of history that only a family home could have. Her grandmother had passed away the year before, but the house remained. It was still a place where memories lingered, where Emily's childhood had been shaped, and where she would often escape to when she needed to clear her mind. That evening, Emily had planned to spend the night alone in the house, a decision that now seemed reckless, considering what would happen next. The storm rolled in quietly at first, as many storms do. The air thickened with humidity, and the sky began to darken. The kind of darkness that doesn't come from just the setting sun, but from something far more oppressive. Something alive. A storm that wasn't just a passing event, but one that carried an ancient, unyielding weight to it. As the wind picked up, Emily closed the windows, locked the doors, and settled into the old leather chair by the fireplace with a cup of tea. She didn't think much of it at first. She had been through countless storms in that house, but this time, something felt different. The wind started to howl, rattling the house like a trapped animal. The trees outside bent in unnatural ways, their branches whipping violently, as if they were struggling to escape an unseen force. The rain, heavy and relentless, pounded against the windows like the fists of angry spirits. Emily tried to distract herself, scrolling through her phone and turning on a movie, but the storm outside refused to be ignored. It crept into her thoughts, lingering in the back of her mind as it intensified, its howls growing louder and more vicious with each passing minute. It wasn't just the usual thunderstorm. This was something else, something older, something that had been waiting. And as the lightning flashed in the sky, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. For a split second, through the rain-soaked window, she thought she saw a shadow, tall, thin, and moving unnaturally fast across the yard. She squinted, but when the lightning struck again, the figure was gone, as though swallowed by the storm itself. Her heart began to race, the comforting warmth of the house now replaced by an icy chill creeping up her spine. She told herself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow from the trees. The house was old, and the storm was making everything seem more ominous. Still, the unease didn't go away. As the night stretched on, the storm showed no signs of slowing down. Emily had tried to sleep, but the noise, the constant pounding of rain and the unrelenting wind, kept her awake. It felt like the storm was closing in, trapping her inside. The walls seemed to pulse with the energy of the storm, vibrating with every flash of lightning and rumble of thunder. And then, at 3:03 a.m., the power went out. Complete darkness swallowed the house in an instant. The only light was the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the rooms for a split second, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Emily fumbled around in the dark, finding a flashlight and clicking it on. Its beam was weak and flickering, barely enough to light her way. The silence that followed was deafening. The storm outside had gone still, the air too heavy, too thick. It felt as if the very atmosphere had turned to stone, suffocating her in its oppressive weight. Then came the sound, the softest of whispers, faint but unmistakable. The kind of whisper that sounds like it's coming from the very walls themselves. Emily. She froze. Her name. The voice was familiar, but it didn't sound like her grandmother's voice. It was deep, otherworldly, and it chilled her to the bone. It wasn't a voice that should have been there, not in that house, not in the middle of a storm. She spun around, her flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was nothing there. Emily. This time the voice was closer, right behind her. Her breath caught in her throat. She swung around again, but still, there was nothing. The house was empty. No one was there. But the voice, the whisper, grew louder, more insistent. As the wind howled outside, the storm's fury suddenly seemed to mirror the growing intensity of the voice, as though the storm itself was speaking to her, calling her, drawing her closer. With trembling hands, she stepped back toward the window, the flashlight's flickering light barely illuminating the darkened room. She dared not look outside, but her instincts pushed her toward it. She reached the window and slowly pulled back the curtain, her heart thudding in her chest. The yard was empty, or so it seemed. In the distance, beyond the trees, there was something. A shape, moving in the dark, just outside the range of the flashlight. It was tall, shadowy, but there was no mistaking its outline. A figure was standing there, waiting. The shadows seemed to bend around it, as though the darkness itself was alive and responding to its presence. Before she could react, a sudden crash of thunder shook the house, rattling the windows. The lights flickered back on, illuminating the room. The figure was gone, but the storm hadn't stopped. In fact, it had only grown worse. Emily's mind raced. She had to leave. She had to get out of the house. But just as she turned to make her way to the door, she stopped. There, standing in the doorway of the room, was something, or rather, someone. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned gown, her long, dark hair matted to her face. The woman's skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide and empty, void of any life. "Help me," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, help me." The words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel the air in the house shift. The very walls seemed to be closing in on her, suffocating her, pressing her toward the doorway where the woman stood. The storm outside raged, as though the heavens themselves were torn apart. Lightning flashed, and the woman took a step forward. Her movement was slow, deliberate, unnatural. She seemed to glide rather than walk, her feet never fully touching the ground. "Help me," the woman repeated, her voice cracking with desperation. Emily was paralyzed with fear. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to escape, but her body refused to obey. The storm outside seemed to have fused with the woman's presence, an unholy symbiosis of wind and rain, and something far worse, something ancient and vengeful. Suddenly the woman's eyes locked onto hers. There was no humanity left in them, only emptiness. "You shouldn't have stayed," the woman whispered, her voice now filled with malice. "Now you'll never leave." As the words left the woman's lips, the storm intensified, its fury breaking through the house like a wild animal set free. The wind howled, the windows shattered, and the woman's figure began to distort, stretching and twisting like a nightmare. The house seemed to groan, the walls trembling as though the entire structure was about to collapse under the weight of the storm's fury. And then, as suddenly as it all began, the woman was gone. The storm, however, remained. But the house was no longer the place it had been. It was no longer Emily's childhood refuge. It was a prison built on the power of the storm and the presence of something far darker than Emily could have ever imagined. The storm never ended. It continued to rage, day and night, feeding off her fear, consuming her. Emily was never seen again. And that night, the night the storm first came, was the last time anyone dared to live in that house. It's said that the most terrifying things are often those that are never fully explained. Sometimes, fear doesn't come from the visible or the tangible. It comes from the unknown, from those moments when reality and nightmare blur together, leaving you questioning what's real and what isn't. That's what happened to Kevin, a man who learned far too late that some storms come with a price. Kevin had always thought of thunderstorms as something majestic, something to admire from the safety of his home. Growing up in the Midwest, where thunderstorms were as common as the sunset, he had seen countless storms roll through, each one as magnificent and powerful as the last. He never feared them. He respected them. It was just nature doing its thing, or so he thought. One evening, however, that belief was shattered. It started with a storm, of course. It was late summer, and the air had been thick with humidity all day. Kevin was sitting on his porch, sipping a cold drink, enjoying the stillness before the storm hit. He could see the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the first distant rumbles of thunder beginning to echo across the fields. But this storm was different, unusual even. There was something off about it, though Kevin couldn't quite place what. As the wind picked up, the temperature dropped sharply, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Kevin decided to head inside. He closed the windows and turned on the TV, hoping to distract himself from the growing sense of unease that seemed to hang in the air. The storm had turned violent quickly, thunder crashing, lightning flashing so frequently that it seemed as though the entire sky was being torn apart. It wasn't until the power went out that things began to take a darker turn. The house fell into an eerie silence. No light, no sound, just the hum of the storm outside. Kevin got up looking for the flashlight, trying to shake off the nagging feeling that something was wrong. As he made his way through the darkened house, something strange caught his attention. The storm wasn't just loud outside, it seemed to be coming from within the house too. The walls trembled with each thunderclap. The floorboards creaked as though something heavy was moving above him. But he knew it couldn't be. He lived alone, and no one else was in the house. Kevin paused in the hallway, his eyes flicking to the staircase. The shadows of the upper floor seemed to shift unnaturally, warping with the flicker of each lightning strike. The darkness above him felt oppressive, as though something was watching, waiting. That's when he heard it. A whisper, low, barely audible, but unmistakably there. It was coming from the top of the stairs. Kevin. He froze. His heart raced in his chest. No one was up there. He knew that for a fact. But the whispering didn't stop. It repeated his name over and over again, growing louder, more desperate. Kevin. With a breath that trembled in his throat, Kevin reached for the flashlight and took a step forward toward the staircase. The wind howled outside, pushing against the house with such force that the windows rattled. The air felt thick, charged with static, as though the very atmosphere had become alive, responding to the storm. He took the stairs slowly, one step at a time, the beam of the flashlight shaking in his hand. As he reached the top, the house fell silent once again. But that silence was worse than the storm. It was as if the house had become a vacuum, pulling all sound into itself, leaving only the quiet hum of something unseen. Kevin turned down the hallway, toward the room at the far end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and the air inside was cold, unnaturally cold. He pushed the door open, the hinges creaking in the stillness. The room was empty, but it wasn't. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a symbol. A strange, intricate symbol, drawn in what looked like chalk, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. It looked almost like a rune or a sigil. A symbol he didn't recognize, but somehow felt he should. Suddenly, the storm outside grew more intense. The wind screamed, the rain battering against the house, and the thunder cracked like the sound of the heavens themselves breaking open. Kevin stumbled back, the flashlight flickering as a gust of wind slammed against the window. The symbol on the floor seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, almost alive, vibrating as if it were drawing power from the storm outside. Then he heard it again, the whisper. Kevin. But this time, it wasn't coming from the top of the stairs. It was coming from inside the room, He spun around, shining the flashlight in every direction. The room appeared empty, nothing out of place. But that whisper, that voice, was unmistakable. It wasn't just in the air, it was in his head, echoing inside his mind, growing louder and more frantic. The temperature dropped even more. Kevin could see his breath fogging in front of him. The symbol on the floor seemed to expand, its lines growing, stretching across the room like tendrils. He could feel something ancient, something powerful, stirring in the darkness. Then there was a flash of lightning so bright it lit up the room in stark white light. And when the light faded, the room was no longer empty. Standing in the corner of the room, facing him with an unnatural stillness, was a figure. A man, or what had once been a man. His face was twisted in agony, his body contorted in unnatural ways, his eyes wide and empty, filled with something darker than death itself. His mouth opened, a silent scream tearing through the air as he reached out toward Kevin. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. The message was clear in the terrible, twisted expression on its face. The storm outside grew even more violent, the wind screaming like a living thing, the rain pounding against the windows. Kevin stumbled backward, his heart racing, his mind screaming at him to run, but he couldn't. He was rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the figure before him. That's when he saw it, the curse. The man, or whatever he had once been, was part of the storm. The curse had come alive with the thunder, with the lightning, with the very storm itself. And now it was looking for someone to claim, someone to carry its curse forward, someone to become a part of the storm. Kevin's breath caught in his throat as the figure took a step toward him, its shadow twisting unnaturally. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, but the storm had already taken hold. The figure was no longer just a man. It was an embodiment of the storm, a manifestation of everything the storm had ever been, a thing of malice, of rage, of ancient power. "You are the storm now," the figure whispered in Kevin's mind. "It has come for you." And as the lightning struck again, everything went dark. The storm raged on through the night, but by morning, Kevin was gone. The house remained, standing as it always had, though the air around it had changed. The storm had left its mark. And those who lived nearby, those who had known Kevin, would tell the story of the storm that never ended. How it had come for him, how it had claimed him, and how now it waited for the next soul to take. And they would whisper one warning: never, ever stay during a thunderstorm. Some storms are not just storms. Some storms are curses. And there you have it. 4 thunderstorm horror stories that will haunt your thoughts long after the storm has passed. But remember, the most terrifying part isn't the storm itself. It's what it brings with it. Whether it's whispers in the dark, figures lurking in the shadows, or ancient curses waiting to be fulfilled, the storm has a way of unearthing things best left buried. But here's the thing. This is just the beginning. The world is full of stories like these. Stories that will send a chill down your spine and keep you up at night. So, if you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss the next horror-filled journey. You don't want to be the last to know when the next storm is about to hit, right? Also, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something like this? Or perhaps you've heard other storm stories that make your blood run cold. We love to hear your experiences here at Verified Fears. And hey, if you dare, send us your spooky stories. You might just find them featured in an upcoming video. But remember, once you share them, the storm may just start following you too.